Let's talk about the US Constitution. Think about it. It's a document from the 1700s, but it's still running the show in America today. So how on earth does it stay relevant? Well, the answer is amendments, but maybe not as many as you'd guess. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the whole story, looking at how the Constitution has actually evolved, one massive change at a time.
Yep, that's it. 27. In over 230 years, the U.S. Constitution has only been officially changed 27 times. That is an incredibly small number when you stop and think about just how much the country has completely transformed, right? Each one of those amendments, well, it represents a huge, huge shift in American society.
And that really is the big question, isn't it? It tells you right away that changing the Constitution is designed to be hard. It's something that's only supposed to happen for issues of massive national importance. So these 27 changes, they're not just some random list of rules. No, they tell the story of America, its biggest fights and its greatest moments.
All right, so where do we even begin this story? Well, we start with the very first batch of amendments. This is a collection so important it's got its own famous name, the Bill of Rights. This is the bedrock.
You have to remember, when the Constitution was first written, a lot of people were scared. They had just fought a whole war to get away from a powerful, controlling government, and they were really worried that this new one could turn into the exact same thing. So the Bill of Rights was the answer. It was basically a promise that the federal government's power would have clear, hard limits, all to protect the basic freedoms of its citizens.
And what's really wild is how many of these protections are still right at the heart of our biggest national debates today. The First Amendment's guarantees of free speech, the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, the Fourth's protection of your privacy, these were not afterthoughts. They were put there on purpose to establish that essential ongoing push and pull between individual freedom and government power. That tension was absolutely necessary to even get the United States off the ground.
So after the Bill of Rights, things go quiet. The Constitution doesn't change for over 60 years. Then comes the next big wave. And this one was so huge, so profound, that some historians literally call it America's second founding. And it all came right after the Civil War. Think about it. The nation had just been completely torn apart by war. The Union's victory meant that the country had to fundamentally rewrite what it even meant to be an American. And the next three amendments were the attempt to do exactly that.
Okay, so the key thing to get here is that this trio of amendments really worked as a package deal. First, the 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery. Done. Then, the 14th, which was truly revolutionary, granted citizenship to everyone born in the U.S. and promised equal protection of the laws. And finally, the 15th Amendment was all about securing the right to vote for black men. You put them all together, and what you have is a radical, game-changing redefinition of American liberty.
All right, so after Reconstruction, we move into what you could call the modern era. Now, the next set of amendments, they're not a single package like the Bill of Rights or the Reconstruction Amendments. It's more like a series of adjustments, tweaks to the system, as America is growing into a global power and facing all new kinds of 20th century problems.
And this whole era was kind of a mixed bag of changes, sometimes even pulling in opposite directions. On one hand, you have this massive social experiment that completely backfired and was undone. And on the other, you see this steady, determined push toward a more inclusive democracy for everybody.
Prohibition is the perfect example of this. In 1919, you get the 18th Amendment, which banned the sale of alcohol across the entire country. It was this huge social experiment, but it didn't quite work out. By 1933, the country did a complete 180 with the 21st Amendment. And get this, that is still the only amendment to ever cancel out a previous one. It's just a fascinating little story of how the Constitution can be used to start something big and then end it.
But beyond social experiments like that, there was an even more powerful theme that started to emerge during this time, expanding the very definition of who gets a say in American government.
And here you see two huge milestones, even though they happened decades apart. First, the 19th Amendment in 1920 finally gave women the right to vote after a long, hard-fought battle. Then, much later, during the Vietnam War, you get the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age to 18. And that was really driven by one simple, powerful idea: old enough to fight, old enough to vote.
The 20th century also raised some new questions about presidential power and, the stability of the office itself. This led to a couple of really important clarifications.
For instance, after Franklin D. Roosevelt won a whopping 4 terms, the 22nd Amendment came along and set the 2-term limit that we're all familiar with today. And then there's the 25th Amendment, which laid out crystal-clear rules for what happens if a president can't do their job. You can see why that was a pretty crucial update, especially in the nuclear age.
So, when you kind of zoom out and look at the whole big picture, a really clear pattern emerges. The Constitution isn't some dusty old relic that's frozen in time. Not at all. It's an evolving document that was actually designed to be updated.
Yeah, looking at it this way really brings the whole story together, doesn't it? You've got that first foundational wave, the Bill of Rights, which was all about protecting people from the government. Then you have that massive, transformative wave after the Civil War that redefined the entire nation. And then, finally, you've got this modern wave of tweaks and adjustments, all focused on trying to perfect the way democracy and government actually work.
And really, that's the ultimate takeaway here. Yeah, the amendment process is slow and it's difficult, and that's on purpose. But the very fact that it exists is a sign that the founders knew that no document written in one era could possibly predict all the challenges of the future. The Constitution was built with the ability to grow and adapt right alongside the country it governs.
Which, brings us to a final and pretty fascinating question. It's been over 30 years since the last amendment was ratified. That's a long time. But the debates are always happening, right? Debates about everything from campaign finance to voting rights. So it really makes you wonder, what's the next big issue going to be? What issue will become so important that it actually requires changing the nation's most fundamental document? What do you think the 28th Amendment will be?